Hello everyone, David Land here. Welcome to the second episode, kind of a bonus episode of the IndyCar Red Pill, and I'm going to be horrible because I'm going to break character and do a bit of a serious video talking about the Universal Aero Kit, which I'm actually looking at on my computer right here. So if you look at me looking off the camera, that's what I'm looking at. And I want to give some thoughts on this. Number one, because a lot of people have asked for my thoughts on the Universal Aero Kit, how it looks, why it's here. People have asked for that, and also because I've got a new camera. Hopefully this is going up in beautiful 60 frames per second, true 60 frames per second, not upscaled 30i, but this is 60p, 1080 60p. But anyway, nobody cares about camera terminology. What you care about is a race car. Now, I also want to talk about the Universal Aero Kit because, to me, it's not a good idea. It's not something that I think IndyCar should be doing. It's not a direction that I think IndyCar should be moving in. The Aero Kits were a great competition tool for both Chevrolet and Honda to compete on the racetrack, because ultimately this is what it's all about, is the competition element of racing. And part of the competition element that is so very important is the fact that the cars are different. They look different, they perform different, they sound different. And IndyCar going to a spec body and engines that are exactly the same pretty much, twin turbocharged, 2.6 liter V6 engines, I just have a hard time thinking, oh, this is interesting technically. Honestly, it doesn't matter to me how good looking the cars are. What matters is the differences between the two cars. What is Chevy doing? What is Honda doing to figure out the best way to beat the other guy? And so going to a Universal Aero Kit, no matter how good looking it is to me a step in the wrong direction, because ultimately you're headed the same direction that Champ Car was in, where you've got, an uninspiring grid of the same cars, and what are you racing for? Just because the drivers are good? I mean, it's great. Drivers are great in racing. Drivers are a big draw in racing. But I'm a person who thinks that drivers are made by the cars they drive. You talk about Dan Gurney, you talk about the Eagles, you talk about A.J. Foyt, you talk about the Roadsters, you talk about Jim Hall, you talk about the Chaparrals. But regardless of how I feel, let's talk about the Universal Aero Kit. We've known about this for some time, I think since about May of last year, somewhere around there, where they announced that the Aero Kits, in terms of competition, are gone from IndyCar, and they're going to go back to a spec body produced by what we assume to be Dallara, though that has not been confirmed or denied yet. But what we do have is now a render of this car, and there's a couple things right off the bat that changes they made that were good. Obviously, the first change is they got rid of the airbox, and if you don't know what the airbox is, it's the thing directly behind the rollover hoop that kind of gives kind of a hump back to the car. That's gone. Now that has been a sticking point of many people talking about Indy 500 cars since 1997, when the airbox first showed up, when the IRL started producing their own cars rather than using year-old kart cars. The other big visual thing done that really needed to be done, and I'm very glad to see done, is the fact that the bumpers are gone. Full stop. They're gone for the super speedways, and they're gone for the road courses. Obviously, the render we've gotten so far, or the most complete render we've gotten, is an oval kit, the super speedway Indy 500 kit, whatever you want to call it. That's the kit we have, and the bumpers, the airbox, they're gone. Now, a lot of people will talk about safety features and say, well, weren't the bumpers the safety feature? Not really. They're really used more these days as an aerodynamic feature. The only thing they really prevent is wing to tire cut downs, in terms of the rear tires getting sliced by wings when people come by. That's prevented that, but as I kind of jokingly pointed out in my last IndyCar Red Pill video, is a couple $1,000s worth of carbon fiber really worth the $600 tire that you're saving? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I think we'll see less debris cautions with the bumpers, and I think the IndyCar guys have enough respect for each other to be able to race without bumpers. I mean, heck, we trust the Indy Lights guys without bumpers. I mean, let's be honest here, folks. The Freedom 100, in terms of the racing, the Firestone Freedom 100, the racing is much closer, and yet they are allowed to have open wheels despite having less experience and the racing being significantly closer. So it's really a good perception issue to see that IndyCar will be back to trusting their drivers without the stupid bumpers. A couple other major changes with this car. Looking at it, obviously the wings are quite a bit smaller than you would see generally, or at least in terms of the old DW12. In fact, the rear wing's a little bit longer or wider than the Chevy or Honda Aero kits we've seen at Indianapolis, but the rear wing shape is actually quite reminiscent of, I'd say, a 1991 Lola. It's definitely got a bit of a 2x4 look to it, but it does have a bit of a curvature that's fairly interesting to look at. I can't say the rear wing is particularly my favorite part of the car in terms of visually. It looks kind of low, kind of looks a little bit dopey. I can't say that Dallara has ever really created a good-looking rear wing, though. It's just the rear of the car they struggle with. Even the Indy Lights car, both in the road course and the oval configuration of that car, the rear wing kind of looks dopey. So I just think that's a Dallara problem. They can't produce a rear wing that looks any good. Obviously, the side pods are a big change and a welcome change, at least from the front half of the side pods. A swept forward design, meaning the radiators have now moved from the rear of the side pod to the front of the side pod, which gives it a much more rounded look, kind of that Coke bottle look you hear a lot of people talk about when you talk about race car design. So it's got that Coke bottle look, but obviously from the second half on, it looks very reminiscent of what we've seen from Dallara, Chevrolet, and Honda in the previous 5 years, in that they've designed a very aerodynamic wheel pod around the top of the rear wheel. Obviously, that's because of the massive amounts of drag a spinning wheel creates. And the reason you didn't see big bunches of bodywork in front of rear wheels in the kart days was, number one, because the rules didn't allow them to build bodywork out that far to the wheel. And number two, they had enough horsepower to get around having so much drag from a spinning rear wheel. The Indy cars on ovals nowadays, when they're not in qualifying trim, produce anywhere from 550 to 600 horsepower. And when you think about the fact that the closed course record set by Jill DeFerrin at Fontana in 2001, or 2000, was set with a car that was producing nearness makes no difference, 1,000 horsepower. I think there's figures that say it was more than 1,000 horsepower. There's figures that say it was closer to 950. Regardless, it was on the north end of 1,000 horsepower. So with about 300 to 350 horsepower less, IndyCar has got to be able to make the car more aerodynamic, and you have to cover up those wheels when you've got such a small amount of power relatively for an oval track car to be able to run 220, 230 miles an hour. Unfortunately, it looks like the track record is safe. That was something that the Aero kits were originally intended to try to knock down. The Ari Luyendyk track record from 1996, 237 miles an hour, 236 and a half, I think, on the average. I think they got scared when the cars started lifting off the ground. Unfortunately, I think that was more to do with the bumpers having a gigantic hole in the back of them, which allowed the cars to lift the rears off the ground. But regardless, we're not going to see a track record with this car. I think we'll see speeds around 225 miles an hour with the qualifying boost, and that's just going to be what it is. Other major change they made is the sponsor blocker. They've actually flipped the sponsor blocker around to not be so much a sponsor blocker anymore. Also, the front wing, obviously I said the wings have gotten smaller. Front wing's a little bit smaller, and actually if you look at the car from the overhead view, you'll see that the car actually has swept back front wings, which is very similar to what Reynard used to use back in the 90s and early 2000s. So, I mean, does it help visually? Kind of, but I think the wings are probably the weakest parts visually still on these Indy cars. They just don't look very good. I think, especially with wings, the theory is less is more. So the smaller your wing is, the better your car is going to look. Now, obviously, moving on to that overhead view, there's kind of a couple things to really point out. There is obviously the very DW12 shape from the back of the car. It's still very much a Dallara DW12. It looks actually remarkably similar to the 2012 to 2014 variation of that car. I mean, just get a green light IndyCar if you have one from that era, and just look at the rear. I mean, it's almost virtually identical. The only difference really from that kind of 3/4 view from the top is the little the louvers there just to the inside of the wheel pods there, which I think is where they got the inspiration to say, oh, this looks just like a DP01. And honestly, I hate to break it to a lot of you fanboys out there, DP01 isn't that good a looking of a car. Now the Lola B02, that's a good looking car. That's what Champ Car used before the DP01. That's a good looking car. That's what they should have based this car on. So obviously the side pods from the top look quite good once you get past kind of the DW12 looking rear. I think the shaping looks very nice. It looks like they've gone and changed the underfloor as well. Maybe it definitely looks like the floor of the car has changed. Again, I can't tell if there's 2 spaces or 1 spaces. You can see the hole in the floor that is cut there. But again, it's hard to tell if that's 1 or 2 spaces on the floor. And obviously the top of the rear wing, it's really just looks like a 2x4. I mean, sitting on there. I mean, there's nothing really to it. There's not really an end plate. It's just kind of a cross across the back of the car. So now we're going to move on and talk about this kind of first image they released where they kind of camouflage the car for whatever reason. So this collage also gives us a look at what they're planning for the road course kit. And first we're going to take a look at this rear wing on the road course kit, and I have to say it looks horrible. It looks horrible. The rear wing of this car looks atrocious. It looks like, at least looking at it, it looks like it's a full-length rear wing, meaning it's very Formula One style in that it goes all the way down to the rear diffuser. I mean, and then you've got this triple stack effect on the rear wing, and it just looks huge and goofy. I don't know what IndyCar's fascination, especially on the road course, with having huge, goofy rear wings. But once again, this is looking like we're going down that direction again, and I don't like it, folks. I don't like it. It looks kind of goofy. We also got to look at the front wing on the road course side of things. It really just looks like an evolution of the front wing that you see on the oval car. There's not a whole lot to talk about. It looks very angular. I don't know if I like that either. I don't know if I'm going to like this thing on the road courses. Obviously, again, the bumpers being gone is going to help the visuals quite a bit. But if they screw up the wings, the front and rear wings, which are maybe the most prominent aerodynamic features on the car, especially on a road course, it makes it very difficult for me to think that this is going to look very good, at least on the road courses. And then obviously there's the third kind of preview of what it'll look like on the road course, which is a significantly different wheel pod there, significantly smaller than on the oval portion. And it's kind of got more of a curvature to it, obviously for downforce. What I do find interesting about the that wheel pod, the pod in front of the rear wheels, both on the oval and the road course kit, is that they're kind of using the Chevy design philosophy that we saw in the Aero kits last year or the year before for Chevy when they designed their car, in that they're creating an air channel to the rear of the car through that little opening between the side pod and the wheel flick. That's an interesting aerodynamic feature, and it tells you that Chevy really got that part of the aerodynamics right, spot on with this Aero kit, with their Aero kit, and obviously IndyCar is actually, Chevy did such a good job that IndyCar is copying them for the foreseeable future. So that was my look at the Universal Aero Kit. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it was a little bit informative. I hope you enjoyed me ranting about things. We'll just have to see how this all works out for IndyCar. There are some things to be hopeful about, but there's also some things to be a bit apprehensive about. So I'm looking at this very much as a let's see how this goes, because there's a lot of things that could go wrong with this, and again, we're just going to have to wait and see. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Be sure to leave a like on this video, and leave also a comment letting me know what you think of the Universal Aero Kit, and also leave me a comment if you want to see me do more videos like this, just kind of talking about racing politics, because that's always fun. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.